Mr. President, honourable judges, it is an honour to appear before you today on behalf of the Government of Armenia. As my colleague has explained, our submissions today focus on the need to correct the record in this case. The most important error made by the court below is that it cast doubt on the reality of the Armenian genocide that the people suffered 100 years ago. I will argue that first, this finding on genocide was unnecessary in this case. Second, that it was reached without a proper forensic process. And third, and most importantly, that it was wrong. The court itself admitted that it was, quote, not required to determine whether the massacres suffered by the Armenians amounted to genocide. This is also the position conceded by the applicant and by the government of Turkey, and the government of Armenia agrees. In addition to being unnecessary, the lower court's comments on genocide were totally unsupported and made without even inviting Armenia's assistance. The court did not explain why it was overruling the Swiss courts, which heard and examined evidence on the matter, 90 kilos of evidence, we were told earlier this morning. Instead, the lower court reached its conclusions that the genocide was not proved or even provable without using any of the fact-gathering tools available to it. It didn't seek the submission of documentary evidence, it didn't call expert witnesses, it didn't hear fact witnesses, it didn't conduct on-site investigations. Mr. President, this court is not the forum, and Perinçek is not the case in which to determine state responsibility for the crime of genocide. But if this chamber were minded to make such a judicial determination, then Armenia must have its day in court. We would, in that situation, welcome the opportunity to submit evidence, which we consider to be overwhelming, that the massacres that killed over 1 million Armenians would today be labelled as genocide. It's something we can't possibly do justice to in the few minutes we've been accorded this morning. In the judgment below, the findings on genocide were simply wrong. The evidence of atrocities committed against the Armenians, some of which is summarised in the dissenting opinion below, clearly establishes both what happened and the specific genocidal intent behind it. Contemporaneous photographs show death marches and concentration camps where thousands of Armenians perished. There are images of beheadings, burnt bodies, railway cars packed with Armenians being herded into the desert. There are descriptions of the Euphrates River filled with blood. There are contemporaneous eyewitness accounts by missionaries, by journalists, including scores of articles in the New York Times. One of these reported Ottoman leader Talat Pasha's chilling resolution that there was, quote, no room for Christians in Turkey. There is a mass of contemporaneous diplomatic cables dispatched by ambassadors back to their capitals and today still available in state archives. The Ottoman Empire's US ambassador Henry Morgenthau, for instance, confirmed that, quote, a campaign of race extermination is in progress against the Armenians. Even the ambassador from Germany, Turkey's ally, said that government leaders were admitting that the purpose behind their actions was, quote, the total obliteration of the Armenians. And in a joint statement issued in 1915, France, Great Britain and Russia denounced the, quote, crimes of Turkey against humanity and civilization. There are also the Ottoman laws ordering deportations and expropriating the houses and churches of the expelled Armenians. Mustafa Arif, who was interior minister in the Ottoman Empire in 1917, admitted that his predecessors had, quote, carried out the law on deportation to exterminate the Armenians. And there is the admission in the Treaty of Sèvres of 1920, where the government of Turkey undertakes to hand over the persons who were, quote, responsible for the massacres. There are the verdicts of Ottoman courts, too, convicting the principal perpetrators and sentencing them to death. This includes the court-martial trial of the Ottoman Prime Minister Talat Pasha, as well as other high-ranking officials. They were all convicted of mass murder rather than the crime of genocide.
Mrs. Clooney, may I also draw your attention that the Armenian government has largely exhausted the time allocated, so might I ask you to conclude?
I will conclude shortly, yes. Mr. President. I was just saying that the conviction was not for genocide, but that's only because the word genocide had yet to be invented at that time. availability of sufficient evidence was summarised in the joint concurring opinion in the court below. Mr. President, you also know that the availability of such evidence has led to the recognition of the Armenian genocide by a variety of governments, parliaments, international organisations and national courts. I won't go into that further because we summarise it in our written submissions. But I would like to finally note that Armenia, as a third party intervening in this case, has not made submissions on the merits and is not here to argue against freedom of expression, any more than Turkey is here to defend it. This court knows very well how disgraceful Turkey's record on free expression is. You found against the Turkish government in 224 separate cases on freedom of expression grounds. So although this case involves a Turkish citizen, Armenia has every interest in ensuring that its own citizens do not get caught in a net that criminalises speech too broadly. And the family of Mr. Hrant Dink know that all too well. Mr. President, this court has been called upon to address the genocide now to correct the errors made by the court below. And the stakes could not be higher for the Armenian people. The decision you are reviewing was a serious step in the wrong direction. Perinçek and his colleagues on the Talat Pasha Committee, the committee named after the principal perpetrator of the genocide and deemed by the European Parliament to be xenophobic, have celebrated the judgment in its current terms and triumphantly complained that it has solved the Armenian question once and for all. Mr. President, the comments in the lower court judgment on genocide dishonour the memory of the Armenians who perished in the Ottoman Empire a century ago and assist those who will deny the genocide in order to incite racial hatred and violence. We hope that the Grand Chamber will set the record straight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.